We're ready to go. Thank you so much for being here. We're in the House Republican Caucus room. We've got another one of our members is going to be here shortly to be available for questions. And I'm Dan Christensen, State Representative, Republican leader. Here we are, week 3. We've got some, a lot of things that are starting to roll here. We've had a lot of discussions with respect to the budget. I know Senator Hill's probably got some comments on that, and we can give you a House perspective on that as well. We're now getting into the nitty-gritty. And as we talked about over the course of the last 2 weeks, we've probably got one of the earliest starts I've ever seen since I've been here. We started having discussions amongst not only Republicans, but also Republicans and Democrats in the House on budget challenges and where we're going to go. We have assembled a team in the House Republican Caucus that consists of our leaders on education, health and human services or health care, and our appropriations folks to make sure we've got a team in place ready to really deal with the biggest budget challenges we're going to be dealing with. To my right, I've got Representative Short, of course, who is working and has been for several years on the carbon issues and environmental concerns that we have as well. Of course, with many of the policies the governor is looking at, we've got those challenges that are going to be coming up, and we look forward to those discussions as well. Senator.
With the Senate with me today is Senator Hill, Ways and Means Chairman, we'll note, and Senator Sharon Brown from the Tri-Cities, who chairs Trade and Economic Development. In the Senate, the hearings are starting to move faster. Bills are starting to come out of committees, and we expect a lot more. We're still focused on having our fiscal house in order, looking at jobs and more jobs. We think that the entire state needs to benefit from recovery, and of course, education issues that are near and dear to all of us. So great to have my team here and join you all today.
Questions?
The House is having a public hearing today on the cap and trade plan proposed by the governor. I know that there's been some concerns within both caucuses about that plan. I wanted to see first from the Senate. Right now, there hasn't been a public hearing scheduled in the Senate. Do you anticipate that to change? And then also, among all of you, have thoughts on this plan changed in the past week or so?
Well, first of all, I think Senator Erickson has said that if they move a bill out of the House, he'll hear it. But he has a full agenda of proactive environmental and energy matters to work on in the Senate. Personally, I think as I learn more, I'm even less enthusiastic. I looked at a major employer in Moses Lake, REC Silicon, that made the list as a polluter. And yet, at the same time, they're showcased as a great employer making an environmental product that we're supposed to buy. So as I see more and more of these things, I'm less impressed.
So one of the things during the CLUE process, which was the Climate Legislative Executive Work Group that we served on with the governor, both Senator Erickson and I wanted to bring this. This is a DOE chart. And what it does is it shows the bottom line is a trajectory of per capita emissions reductions that this state has made on a per capita basis. The line underneath it is 2035. Now, the thing that really kind of blew me away is we're like a half a point away from that on meeting per capita emissions reductions. So I think when we get to the list of the businesses and employers who are going to be paying this tax, because that's what it is, it affects our manufacturers, it affects food producers, transportation, all of the things that we rely on as a trade-dependent state, but most importantly, those middle-income wage jobs for families. I mean, we all talk about that, and we all know that those are important jobs for us to have. And I think those are going to be the things that are really going to be in the crosshairs. As far as the legislation, we're going to be hearing it today. I am concerned with the amount of discretion that the governor in his legislation gives to the Department of Ecology for certainty. And again, for our major employers in our big cities and small towns like mine are concerned about that kind of broad authority. So certainly I'm open to listening to what folks have to say, but I think as far as I'm concerned, the governor's bill is a non-starter with the way it's drafted right now.
Another question.
Senator Erickson and Senator Baumgardner just introduced a bill on basically wanting to pull the plug on Bertha. I mean, as a Seattleite, that's what I'm really concerned about or interested in. Is this part of the GOP's negotiating stance with the Democrats on the transportation package? Is this one of the reforms that you want to lock into your package? Is it totally different from what your stance is on the package? How does it fit in the overall picture?
Well, you know, for those of you that were at the City Club Forum, we all kind of danced on that pinhead from the 4 caucuses about what and when Bertha might do. I think what it is, it's a bill proposed by 2 members that gives it food for discussion. It's not a package, part of a package, but it's an idea from 2 members that probably will stimulate a lot of discussions about that project.
How do you all feel on that? Where do you stand on that bill? You must have an opinion on it at this point.
Well, when I spoke at City Club, to be very consistent, I said I thought it was too soon to pull the plug.
Why?
I think, no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, we don't know, you know, if they get going on time again, if they start making good progress, the contingency fund, I couldn't say that it was the time to pull the plug at City Club, and I personally don't know that it is, but I think 2 members have an idea, drafted a bill, and it's going to create discussion about the project and about how we deal with protecting the taxpayers on future mega projects.
I think too that while you've got 2 members in the Senate that are running this bill, I mean, look, there's 98 members in the House, there's 49 members in the Senate, and many of us come from obviously different corners of the state, different interests, priorities, and the like. To think that every bill, though, that's brought forward is necessarily even a caucus position on this would be a very inaccurate statement. However, that being said, I do believe that this bill does bring up a point that probably should have been dealt with better when the original agreement was made. I sat on the Transportation Committee at the time that the funding for Bertha was put into place. I voted no on it. One of the reasons why I voted no on it is there was not clear that it was going to say that if something goes sideways, where does the responsibility lie? Who's going to pick up the bill for this? And many people were referring to the Big Dig in Boston and other projects and challenges that have happened along the way. As you recall, if you were around when the negotiations were going on that, it took months even after. It took about 1.5 years for them to even figure out after it was approved how they were going to build it, who was going to be involved. We were, as I recall, about 10 it was costing the taxpayers about $10 million a month in delays, you know, when it came to the negotiations. There were a lot of gray areas even going into this, and I think as legislators, especially if you're in a district that has not seen a lot of benefit from transportation packages in the past, but you continue to see hundreds of millions and billions of dollars being put into projects and not seeing the results that I think the public is looking for, our constituents do get a little bit, you know, incensed over these types of things. And for them to ask us as legislators to, let's have a discussion point on this, and if we have to bring up a bill to have that discussion, I think that's relevant to, you know, to the debate that takes place down here.
So it's sort of like,
Jerry?
yeah, it's worth discussing, but I don't detect any hardcore passion on the bill. Am I reading this correctly?
From my perspective,
Yeah.
and this is a Senate bill, but from my perspective, I think that a bill like this is going to bring up a lot of dialogue and maybe some discussions that we need to review. But I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I think it's sometimes, I mean, look, and as I've mentioned to you all before, you've done a fantastic job of explaining some of the frustrations of Bertha over the course of the last year plus. The people around the state of Washington, this is not a new thing for them. They're very familiar with this big, boring tunnel, the largest of its kind in the world, being stuck under the city for more than a year now. Major efforts are being put into place to get this thing going again. My question is going to have, that I have right out of the chutes is, okay, what if the machine had been under the city, where we couldn't put a crane over it and pull it out? In other words, it's under a building. What would we be doing? What would we be doing then to try and solve the problem? If you've got high-rise buildings over the portion of this dig, it's a whole other set of challenges. And these were the types of things that were brought up in dialogue early on this that I don't think we really had the liability portions of the contract written properly. And so I think there's a lot of concerns. Maybe we get it fixed. Maybe it does start working. Who's to say it's not going to go another 1,000 feet or less and break down again?
Senator Hill,
Those are legitimate concerns.
you've spoken in the past, Senator Hill, about alternatives to approving all the collective bargaining agreements, such as only approving some or maybe not approving any this year. Have you been in talks either with your caucus or with Democrats across the aisle exploring any of those?
It's pretty preliminary right now as we try and figure out the entire budget problem and what the levers are and the solution. You know, clearly That's half $500 million. It's a big chunk of the budget, so it's going to be something that we're going to be looking at very closely.
This is question for Mark. Well, going back to Bertha, will that bill get a hearing?
You know, 24 hours ago, I heard about it. I haven't talked to Senator King or the sponsors yet, so I really can't even give you a straight answer because I don't know.
I'd actually like to hear from leaders as well is about the bargaining agreements. How important do you think it is for a budget this year to include raises for state employees or these raises?
Well, I think that we went into this with a 4-year balanced budget that assumed a teacher COLA. There was no question that was part of the carry forward budget. I think the budget assumed some increase of raises was out there as all but certain. The question is, were they financially feasible when the governor certified them, or OFMD? Because if we go back to book 1, a lot of really important things didn't get funded in book 1, but bargaining agreements did. And I think if you go back to our website and look at the myths of compensation, you'll see that 86% of public employees did receive pay raises in the last 4 years. The turnover rate is also kind of interesting. 9.8% was cited. 4.5% was due to resignation, which is below the national average. 2.8% retired, which is normal. 2.1 was end of appointments, disability, things like that. 0.4% were actually a dismissal or layoff, which is pretty small. The numbers point out that the average state employee salary is about $3,000 higher than a public employee sector salary, private. And then we look at, I think only 8% of public employees didn't get a raise over that period of time. So we have to ask the question, how much is enough? And that's a discussion we'll be having, and these are the facts that are available from our website.
Do you think that the governor and the OFM are being dishonest then, making the case that state employees haven't had a raise in 6 years?
You can spin things a lot of ways. But this was negotiated behind closed doors with no input, and then it was placed as a higher priority in the governor's value system than levy equalization for our schools, keeping really bad people in jail. He let them out 150 days early, and it cut into women's health care for breast and cervical cancer. These are issues that I don't think should be behind a collective bargaining agreement. Nobody said no raise, but we have to ask hard questions for the taxpayers because we do have a legal obligation to fund education, and we expect to fund education first.
There was some criticism in the hearing this week about negotiating the contracts behind closed doors in secret. But at the same time, it was brought up that you all negotiate the budget behind closed doors. Would you be willing to open up the budget discussions so that the public can see the discussions that go into spending not just $500 million, but
We do, it's called public hearings.
but
We
you
have
negotiate
actual-
No, we have public hearings on that,
Yeah. Well, you'll have a public
Information
hearing
comes out.
you'll have a public
and
hearing on contracts.
we're not violating the law in that there's supposed to be a committee involved in that advisory position on collective bargaining, Jim. Jim Honeyford serves on the committee and they've never met. So he serves on a committee to approve, disapprove, recommend, and they've never had a meeting. So I'd like to see the governor move to our level of openness, and then we'll talk about the next level.
There's races recommended for elected officials. How do you reconcile being skeptical about the pay package versus your own raises?
I'd like to comment on that. It was, how long has it been now, 8 years? 7 or 8 years ago, this came up again. Now remember, when it comes to our raises, it's not through the legislature. Citizens Initiative put in place a board that is responsible for dealing with elected officials' salaries. And it was back in 2007 or 2008, they came to us wanting to give us a raise, right on the heels of the economy taking a downturn. And as legislators, we got together and said, no. Now, that's not even something there's no legislation involved. It's not like the collective bargaining agreements or bills and budgets that we deal with normally with all the other state employees. It's a board that has been put together, kind of like the Public Disclosure Commission under a Citizens Initiative, to be in charge of that. I think that as I've talked to my colleagues about this, that we don't have any appetite of even looking at that type of a thing until we come up to any kind of, we got a lot of other solutions we got to look at when it comes to the other state employees, the rest of our budget. I know myself personally, I'm not interested in looking at that as even a possibility. Now, I might hear some complaints from other people on the campus about that, but myself, our priority is to deal with the rest of the budget first. I do find it interesting that it got thrown in, the timing wise of them doing this was interesting, that they threw it in right when they did. And I will say this, overall, my colleagues would agree. Anybody I've talked to from my own caucuses agree that this is not, it's kind of silly for us to even be thinking about that at a time like this.
Yeah, but you have to think about it at this time.
Yeah, but it's not our priority. Our priority is taking care of the rest of the budget first.
And
Jerry?
also, one of
This is,
our
I'm sorry, Senator.
Go ahead.
one of our priorities as legislators is to look for ways that we can grow the economy. How do we make more jobs? How do we expand the economy? We want this to be a very thriving, prosperous state.
Jerry?
This is the governor's third session, working with the legislature and working with some of you folks. I wondered if you could talk about, is he any different than the first two? What ways are you seeing as difference? And in particular, the transportation issue, he seems to be going around to certain groups here in Olympia and around the state, urging community folks to lobby you guys harder than they have in the past to pass transportation. And so I'm just wondering if if you're sensing a different tactic of his to move his agenda here in Olympia around.
The only difference I've seen at this point, and we're on our third week, so there's all kinds of things that can happen over the course of the next several weeks, but I will say this, that we've already had more meetings with him this year than we did last year. And that being said, that means that the line of communication effort, I think, is much stronger this go around than it has been in the past. So my hope would be that as long as we're expanding those lines of communications and we remain at that throughout the process, that we will make sure that all five corners really are participant in the process. And so that for me is good. I think that I'm hopeful that that is a sign of good things to come.
Senator Simpson?
I'd echo what Dan said. We're talking more often. I still am a glass half full guy. I trust Curtis King to negotiate and work in good faith, just like I expect Andy Hill is going to work closely with Senator Hargrove to solve solutions. So I'm still an optimist on all fronts.
But has the governor called any five-corner meetings yet this session on any issue or any reason?
We've met with the governor more often. I think our first five-corner meeting is coming up, and but I forget the exact date. It's coming up, Jerry. So the glass is half full.
Senator Hill? Have you worked with the governor on the budget at all? Yeah?
Not personally with the governor, but I have a standing meeting with his OFM director on a weekly basis. So we meet and have a good relationship. So if something comes up between them, we talk. Clearly, this is something that you got to have all five corners involved to get the job done. So we're working closely with everybody.
Who else? Yes, sir.
Is there, you said that the cap and trade bill is non-starter as it stands. Is there any possibility that any of you could come around to some form of cap and trade? In other words, are you willing to negotiate on it, or do you even think that the state should try to meet the targets, carbon reduction targets that are in the law?
Sure. Well, I think, honestly, when I get back to the sheet that I showed you, we're doing a pretty good job of that right now. So I think anything that we need to look at going forward, and I would echo it's as much the governor being willing to negotiate as it is us. We have programs in place that allow people to choose what makes sense for them, whether you're an employer, whether you're an individual. You've got energy efficiency things you can do with your homes. You can choose to drive different vehicles. You can choose to take public transportation. A number of choices. Businesses can make investments in energy efficiency, but it's done in a way that makes sense for them and doesn't harm jobs. And it doesn't make it harder on working families or in a rural district like mine, the 7th, where we have small communities and these employers that we're talking about in this are actually very major employers for me. So I think we've done some things that continue to allow our state to be competitive and not hurt our trade dependent status. So I think it really depends on whether or not the governor intends to maybe do something that makes sense. We're going to question him very hard on the economic considerations and the work that he did or didn't do. So I think it's kind of stay tuned. We're going to look at what he has to say and what the legislation is. I just don't think giving DOE broad unilateral authority is a good thing.
And one of the things to tandem onto what Shelley is talking about, one area that we agree on is small modular reactors. The governor signed a letter in support of small modular reactors. The prior governor signed a letter in support of small modular reactors. The Secretary of Energy, Secretary Moniz, has signed a letter in support and has been particularly supportive with regard to the grants that are available to small modular reactor research and emerging technologies.
So we have time for one more question.
Could I weigh in on that just a little bit? I mean, the thing about cap and trade is that one, he uses the term cap and trade and carbon tax interchangeably, and they're not the same thing. So there's a little bit of confusion out there. But to institute a cap and trade program at the state level is kind of like building a square prison with 3 walls, okay? I mean, you just have an exit option, and so it doesn't work. But in terms of a legitimate counter proposal, the only places that carbon taxes have worked, where they've improved the environment but also didn't harm the economy, is where they made them revenue neutral with offsets to labor taxes. So if you look at the places in Europe where carbon taxes have worked, where they raised the carbon tax, they offset that in an equal proportional mechanism with labor taxes, unemployment taxes, worker comp taxes. And so what you did was you reduced the amount of carbon consumed, but you also created an offset incentive to hire more people. You know, that's a more serious proposal.
Okay, there are 2 intertwined questions.
We have time for one more question. The
Okay.
Senate has floor action.
Okay, one, the governor, part of the governor's push is his lowering taxes is not raising the gas tax. That's where he's coming at. And is there any type of carbon emissions tax that you guys could support? Say if he didn't go far as he wanted to with the Department of Ecology.
I will say, John, on the gas tax portion, I don't have to give you the answer. Jim McIntyre already did. He said bonding that remaining gas tax money is reckless and an unworkable policy. So Jim McIntyre should be listened to and respected in issues like this.
State Treasurer.
So that cuts out any gas tax.
No, if you're going to use carbon and bond it and bond the gas tax, it's unworkable. That's Jim McIntyre. That's not Mark Chesler, Republican.
Thank you, everyone.